Hello and welcome to Beyond the Drip, a podcast about infusion therapy. Excited to be on episode 3 today. My name is John Love, one of the co-hosts here. I have all of my trusty co-hosts here. I will introduce them for a second. I'm Vice President of Pharmacy Services for ProChant, a large revenue cycle management company for Infusion Pharmacy. I represent the Deep South out of this group. In the upper corner, we have my Brandon Carpenter, who's now in Indiana. And Brandon is CEO of MedEdge. He's our technology person. We have Pam McIntyre on out of the great state of Texas. And so, Pam, hi, how are you?
I'm great, thanks.
Good, good. Also have Brian Sullivan on out west in balmy Arizona. Brian's our payer guy. Brian, how are you?
Doing great. It is Sonoran summer here, so we're feeling it.
Wonderful. So we're now with episode 3, everybody. Really excited. Today, our topic is going to be around the recent antitrust lawsuit success from Google. So what we're really going to talk about today, and I'm really excited to bring up, is I want to have a really open conversation around the idea that the DOJ decided to bring an antitrust against Google for their market dominance. And essentially what that means here is that they believe that Google was too big to actually allow for capitalism to happen, and everything underneath that made everybody suffer. Is everybody familiar with that one? Anybody read up on it lately?
It's a tidal wave, so to speak. I mean, it is a big event. That does not happen at that scale. You know, last one I can think of is kind of the bells breaking up, right? AT&T into the bells,
Right.
Microsoft. But I mean, this is pretty big news.
Yeah, I think biggest antitrust success since the 90s in Microsoft when they were like, hey, listen, it's impossible there. So, and I think it's unique that it would be in data, right? Because data has kind of driven us technology since the 90s. So that would make sense a little. So, but a couple of stats here for all you stats folks as we talk about it. So coming off of this, there's a couple of folks asking the question, hey, I'm listening to this, I'm 4 minutes in and really wondering what this has to do with infusion. I promise we'll get to it, okay? I promise. We're just burying the lead a little bit. So as of today, Google holds 92% of all global search engine market share. And so 92%. You know, uniquely enough, you'd ask, so why does that matter so much for Google? Well, 80% of Google's 200 billion with a B comes from their advertising that comes out of those searches. So I think we all know, we can open the kimono, why does Google not want to lose this?
Yeah.
You know, well, that's because they have about 160 billion reasons why they do not want to lose this market share. You know, the problem is when you have 90% of it, they can dictate whatever it happens, right? You know, we've heard that, right? You know, politically, we've heard if they allow certain things to be searched and certain things to be brought down, that will change everything. We've heard that, right? Both sides, the left and the right, say this tech company, you know, there's all this, you know, bad information going back and forth. All of that is so what has happened here is that the U.S. government have said no more, Google. You're too big. You control too much. So here's what I have for you guys today, my lovely panel. I have a quiz, a conundrum of sorts. Can anybody scratch their brilliant head and tell me, inside healthcare, do you have any entities that own a large, massive amount of the market, continue to get bigger, create for themselves too big to fail, so that everything underneath them can do exactly what they want? They require everybody underneath them to come to their practices so that they can save or make as much money. And the common consumer or person has zero power in any of that. And they're making billions and billions and billions in unchecked. Is there anyone, I'm just going to throw it out there, Brandon Carpenter, I'm going to pick on you. Does that sound like anyone in the healthcare space?
You know, John, the entities that might come to mind most are payers, our partners in payers.
Payers. So episode 3 is called, Hey Google, show me a monopoly in healthcare. Because it exists. It's called payers. The question we're going to analyze today is how in the heck can you say that Google is a monopoly and dangerous, but we continue to allow payers to be more of a monopoly than Google is. And let's just guess what's at stake, right? Like what's at stake, Brian, with a Google search? Give me your top. I need your top 2 Google searches. Don't lie to us. We need just Brian O'Sullivan's top 2. What do you search most? Google. Give it to us.
Usually something, my wife wants to do something and I'm looking for a restaurant or a movie, right?
100%. Hey, we're going to be in Phoenix. Best pizza in Phoenix. So listen, I'm just asking this question, Pam. Shouldn't we, if that's dangerous, right? Our Google searches are dangerous. How much more should patient care matter when we talk about payers, right? I mean, it's crazy, right? That we would say, hey, this is dangerous, but we're totally okay with patient care. I'm going to give you a couple of stats before we hop in, okay? Because I want to make sure that you guys, that at least our audience and all of our listeners are listening to this right now. So as of today, 5 payers have 50% of all market. Now, I want to remind you, that's not pizza inquiries. That's not reviews. That is patients' lives. 50% belong to 5 single payers. Regional dominance is way worse. In the state of Alabama and Hawaii, one payer has over 70%. 70%. So I'm going to ask the question, why would that payer do what's best for the patient? If you have 70% of all the lives in Hawaii, what power, Pam, what power do they have?
That's a really good point. When you start talking about expansion of services, though, and vertical integration and galloping towards being able to be a one-stop shop for people, which at first sounds attractive, but a couple of weeks ago, we had a payer in the West shutter a bunch of urgent cares where that service was available to people and it was readily available. It was the greatest thing. And all of a sudden, they're not going to be there anymore. But that doesn't change the requirement that certain, whether you got an EPL plan or whatever, you have to go to this branded shop. When it's gone, what do you do?
Yeah, no, 100%. And so you mentioned something that I want to. Brandon Carpenter, could you please educate myself and all of our guests, our millions of guests here, on what we mean when we say payer vertical integration?
Yeah, so basically, John, what that means is they control more and more of the patient care continuum, right? So what we're talking about is, they now own hospitals. They also own urgent cares. They own pharmacies, infusion pharmacies, specialty pharmacies. And the crazy part about that is obviously, what do we always say? You're going to make more money off the customers you already have than going and getting it. Forcing those people who are already our customers to go use our services adds to our bottom line.
So essentially, there's like a hierarchy line, right? The payers at the top, and now they're buying hospitals and they're buying specialty pharmacies and infusion pharmacies and health, so that they want to keep the patient up and down here. The problem with that, though, Brian, is, and maybe you could talk a little bit about that. I'm going to give you an analogy, Brian, and then let you talk a little bit about it. You ever heard about the deer, the corn, and the fence? You ever heard that?
That's not an Arizona story.
It's a Southern story. All right. You say, listen, if you put out some corn, deer will show up and eat it. And then you put up a panel of fence, okay? And you put out more corn, and deer will come and eat it. And then you square off that fence now here, and you put up corn. And the deer will come eat it. And then you put up a third panel and put out corn, and the deer will come eat it. And then you put a gate on the fourth that's open, and you put out corn, and the deer will come eat it. And then you just close the gate, and you own the deer. And so in this idea, Brian, that seems, as Pam talked about, it seems great, right? We're going to make everything easy for you. But you don't have any choice anymore, right? Like you're in the damn gate. You're like, wait a second, all the corn's gone, and they're like, guess what? There's no more corn now. You are the corn. that's how that works. Brian, am I crazy, or is this the real life?
Well, yeah, and I think it's happened slowly enough that, another analogy, you raise the temperature of the water and, the frog will stay in, right?
Yeah.
And Congress didn't have one specific event to act, right? Maybe, and again, we're not trying to beat anybody up, but change healthcare. I mean, that's kind of an unavoidable story, right? Of how dependent we are. John, I think you mentioned, too big to fail. We saw that with banks, right? We've got to bail banks out, or we've got to bail out auto manufacturers, and it's clearly not good. And the late senator from California, Pete Stark, was very concerned about physician integration, right? That we refer to our lab, we refer to our physical therapy. I don't think MRIs were back, but we refer for our X-ray. Maybe they had pharmacies. That integration within providers where they control the referrals was inherently bad because the doctor wrote the script for all of that.
Right.
I think we have the same thing now within the engine of insurance with prior auths, with owning, with exclusivity. They build the network that the same thing is there. And then employment of physicians by insurance companies where we have that same dynamic that I think Pete Stark would have been upset with. So I think it's happening, but it happens slow.
And now the payer owns the doctor, owns the referrals, and when you write the script, they own the pharmacy that produces the script.
Mm-hmm.
So listen, let's ask another question. If that's the case, how long before they own the manufacturer of the drug?
Why wouldn't they? Why? Like I asked the question. Do you? First off, you probably don't trust McDonald's burgers anyway. Okay, maybe you should. But if they owned all the farms, would you really trust them? You're like, oh yeah, I promise. You can just count on us. I promise. We didn't do anything to make the meat 3 times more than what it normally is. Like, I don't.
If you're that road with food,
Yeah, I want to go down any road with food. So just let it be known to the Beyond the Drip world. I want to go down any road with food. I'm going down that road.
Look at the produce. You can, if you want to look and be a little alarmed, go into the source food, and the majority of produce is maybe 2 or 3 different varieties because of the large wholesale system. Smaller organic or even kind of boutique varieties just won't be available. And they say it's because American consumers want consistency
No, they want shelf life. They want shelf life. Also, they want to convince me that slightly orange tomato isn't good because the super red one inside the big box store, right, looks good. Mm-hmm. But it's only pumped with stuff to make it look red. All right? Mm-hmm. The slightly orange one is real.
Right.
Real. So yeah, you're 100%. And listen, I do want to say this though, because I think it's important as we get in deeper into this issue, is that you'd be hard pressed to find a more capitalism pro person than me, right? But I use this analogy a lot. But I also know that freedom exists, but you should not go 140 on the freeway. Okay, there's too much at stake, right? So I want you to have the freedom to drive your vet. All right, that you've earned it. I want you to feel, but like, listen, you can't go 145 on the freeway. You can't get drunk and drive. There are things that say this impacts way too many people beyond yourself. We have to know that, right? So I am a incredibly pro-capitalism stuff, but come on, we have to use some. So I understand there are some things that when we're feeding 300 million people, we're not just doing farmers markets. Okay, I get that, right? And so. The first thing I want to talk about here, and just so that everybody knows, so, this regulatory environment, if you're trying to figure out, so what is this Google thing? 1945, we had basically the McCarran-Ferguson Act, which was, had kind of this partial exemption for the insurance agency from federal antitrust laws. And now that's been completely, and they did that so that they could grow, but that's been completely criticized for now allowing health insurers to engage in practices. And I just to say this, that would be fully illegal in another place. It would be fully illegal. So how do we know that? Well, Blue Cross Blue Shield paid $2.7 billion with a B in 2020 for a settlement. And listen, payers like their money. They don't give it away easy. So if they paid 2.7 billion, it's because it was real. It's because they got caught with their hand in the cookie jar. And I would just say that their hands are only in cookie jars. Like, I just think that's where they are right now. And I think it's because we've allowed it to be. The last thing I'll say before we start getting over into kind of the understanding of this whole thing is in 2023, almost $200 million was spent for lobbying. So our folks aren't going to go against payers when they're writing them $500,000 checks for reelection. So we've got to have this conversation somewhere other than that, I think, because if we're sitting around waiting for Congress, I just think that, that's the person putting dinner on their table. And I just don't think they're going to bite that hand. I don't. So that's kind of getting us here on how in the world can we get to a place where, Google is the one that's bad, but yet payers aren't. So let's talk in real specific. Okay? We do have a monopoly in healthcare. We do. And it's payer focused. Again, we talked about 50% all being on one. Okay, those horror stories are really terrible. We have lack of competition. We have barriers for new entry in places. And the market structure of this, it kills the broader healthcare system. And then, therefore, it breaks down into infusion and it kills our folks, right? And Pam, I want to sit here with you mostly. I mean, we'll all, I'm sure, but, maybe you could just talk for 30 seconds about, obviously Expert Infusion Nursing is your company that you own, but you're a care provider, right? I mean, what is the impact of actual infusion care because of these barriers and this system? What have you seen in your career?
The delay in prior authorizations. And it's impacted not only new business, success of new companies, but ultimately patient care. The hoops that people need to jump through. And we're not just talking about the infusion companies or the pharmacies, but the physicians to get their patients' care approved has caused an extraordinary delay in care to the point where the recommendations from some of the payers are for therapies that aren't even recommended.
Right. So essentially what you're seeing, so you're saying live out on the field, you're seeing patients who simply because of somebody somewhere have said dollars and cents are not able or are delayed in getting actually the drug that they need. Yes. So
And
what type of disease states? Like, because I want this to be real, because we're not talking about a common cold, right? We're not talking about a thyroid medicine, like real disease states.
well, don't bemoan, because that's a real thing too, and we can go down that road if you like.
That's
But
fair.
these patients, by the time they get a diagnosis, someone with immune deficiency, I think the average is 15 years before they're actually diagnosed with the disorder. By then have suffered several hospitalizations a year, likely have some permanent respiratory damage, may even have become disabled because of their disorder. And now you're going to wait for weeks and weeks before you approve what is deemed to be the right treatment for them. It's frustrating. And I can tell you that from a family experience. In my family, a member had to wait weeks. And we're talking about a kid with a GI disorder that ended up losing 50 pounds by the time they were diagnosed, and then had to beg for treatment. And this was from a major payer. So let's get real out for what it is. When you have details that are required for prior authorization that vary between payer, that's an obstruction to care. When you have inadequate staffing on the part of the payer in order to improve these authorizations, and inadequate doesn't just mean numbers, it means experience. And that goes all the way up to the peer-to-peer level. That's an obstruction to treatment. But on the other end of this is a child, is an adult that can't work to provide for their family, and sometimes ultimately can't work, ends up having to relinquish their job and losing. Think about the real prospect here. Patients with cancer, field for cancer therapies has exploded.
Right.
If I were a woman that needed chemotherapy and then needed with my chemo, I might feel well enough to work. What about the delay or the access, the mere access close to my home to an approved provider? What if that's an obstruction to me being able to go back to work?
Pam, I mean, these stories are real and they're heartbreaking because, listen, here's the deal. Like, we all live in a world of that'll never happen to us until it happens to us, right? It doesn't matter what it is, right? Car wrecks, school shootings, they're all trauma. They're all terrible. But imagine saying, I have insurance. I pay for insurance. I have a doctor. The doctor's a specialist. The doctor says I need this drug. And you're saying, we're not so sure. And you're like, what? I mean, and listen, I would much, it might be odd. I'd much rather that happen to me than happen to my wife or my children. Because I think I'd end up in jail or something. Like, because if I can't get it, I can't get it. But my child needs this. And they're like, oh, we're putting in more paperwork. I mean, it'd be one of these things where you'd find me like, at the headquarters, probably getting arrested. Like, I'm in Minnesota trying to talk to somebody. Real quick, Pam, before we move on this, because I think we could spend the entire time with these stories of the impact. But, stair-step therapy, you understand it. I mean, if our group doesn't understand stair-step therapy, because I think there's people beyond the drip it's called beyond the drip because it's everything that goes into infusion outside of purely, hey, putting a drug that's mixed in a body, right? Like you or Brandon, can somebody give me a great definition so that making sure everybody knows what that is? And maybe I call it stair-step therapy.
I mean, what I would say, John, is basically escalations, right? We want to try something that maybe isn't as invasive and as expensive because again, we're paying for it. So, think about this, right? Like my son, he wanted, the new NCAA game that came out this year for football. And we just have an Xbox One or 360 or something like that. And we've played Xbox games on it. No big deal. So we go and get it and come to find out, hey, you need a new Xbox and you need, all this kind of stuff. And so it's like, and I'm like, well, wait a minute. What if we just got an older version of the game? Things like that, right? So I kind of equate it to the same thing of like, well, before we go all big and gun ho, maybe something else can work that's cheaper and more advantageous for me to not have to spend, all in $450 to get this one game that you want to play, right? So
that works for me in that analogy, Brandon. But are you and Pam, are you guys telling me that a doctor says, I know that this is the drug that should work, and a payer says, you need to use this drug for 30, 60, 90 days that you don't believe will work because it's cheaper?
And what if the store, Brandon, and they decide that, no, I know you want this NCAA game.
Right. And then you get it home and you play it and your son's like, well, that's not the game. I want to play, Notre Dame. Notre Dame's not in Madden.
Yeah.
And you're like, okay, now we have to go back and buy the new game. So you feel like, well, why did I spend all this money? Because guess what? I still had to pay my copay, right? I had to spend that money to do this when the educated person, and here's a question I have, Pam. When the payer's making these decisions, is it a medical professional making these decisions, or is it just somebody who is walking through a decision tree?
There's levels. People that have training look at the data. But if it isn't clear, someone with advanced training will review. Sometimes it eventually gets to a physician because the patient's physician and the insurance company physician have to talk about it. The biggest complaint among specialists is this GI doctor is calling for a peer-to-peer, but they get a pediatric emergency physician that may deny the treatment. It isn't necessarily a board-certified gastroenterologist or infectious disease specialist. So we're not talking apples and apples. You're
Yeah,
talking, you're
that makes
talking.
a
That's
lot of
not how it
sense.
works.
It makes a lot of sense to me because here and listen, you guys are the smart ones, and I'm kind of the baseline person who just breaks it down, right? So to me, this is what I heard. You have a doctor who sits at the payer, who's paid by the payer, whose reviews are done by the payer, whose metrics are the payer. You have a doctor who sits in front of a 9-year-old girl with Crohn's disease. And I want the doctor that sits in front of the 9-year-old girl with Crohn's disease to say what drug they should be on. That's what I want. And that's not what's happening. I have several expletives I could say right now. Which,
It's almost like the patient, Bill of Rights or whatever, where they say you get to choose the care. You get to choose the care as long as you agree with the payer.
correct.
Yeah.
And they'll say, but Brian, we have doctors on staff, right, Brian? Right?
Right. Well, though you're saying that, it reminds me of the honesty, and I haven't had an auto claim in a while, but I had teenagers at one point and had a bunch. So when they come out, they're at least truthful, right? The person's title is an adjuster, right? They're not on your team. You want, this, you want original equipment parts, you want this fixed, and they're there to adjust it down.
Adjust
right?
it.
Right. I mean, that's their job, right? Their business card tells you what they're there to do. Prior auth, medical management, case management. I think they even have, Pam, you probably see this, clinical, that they have the case manager that's a patient advocate, like an RN that's supposed to manage a patient through their chronic condition, through their oncology, as if they're on the same team. I don't know. I'm not in that.
We are on the same team as long as you remain profitable to us.
Right. Yeah.
And if not, guess what? We're not on the same team anymore. I do think we could spend all day on this, but we need to talk about kind of the regulatory challenges around how do we regulate these payers now that they've gotten so big and they are a monopoly. Brian, I'm going to turn to you to lead this portion of the conversation. Sullivan Group, I know Sullivan, CEO of O'Sullivan Group, their strategies, payer relations, you're roaming the country talking about payers in all 50 states with all sorts of healthcare, helping people get credentialing, helping people get better contracts, get access to care. As you look, Brian, and you analyze the current regulatory environment, how in the world would we even begin? What needs to happen to start to reform this? Where would we even start?
Well, I was thinking a little bit of, dovetailing off we were talking about with Pam of some of these things come out of a response, like, a tragedy, right? You get enough pedestrian deaths and eventually you get a stoplight or a stop sign, right?
Right.
There were things that were happening where we've got these various legislative steps that were incremental, right? To me, and I'm not bashing, Blue Cross Blue Shield Association is American as Chevrolet and apple pie, right? And
Right.
It came along and states invited them. They had specific charters sometimes. It's a franchise. Many of them were not for profit, very community focused, right? And then healthcare became expensive. So we had the HMO Act in the 70s. We created Medicare and Medicaid. And then usual and customary, which was really what Blue Cross did, right? They weren't in networks and prior auths. Then it came to managed care, HMO Act. We had a focus on preventative. It all seemed like good things. PPOs seemed like good things. And then all of a sudden, everything, changes. And when we started the podcast of vertical integration, we're still catching up from a regulatory perspective to that. And I think we're way behind the game in that. We tried some of it with the Affordable Care Act, very comprehensive, but it really didn't change insurance companies. In my opinion, it really empowered them, right? We had the biggest first step of that in 2010 was Medicaid expansion, right? So more people covered under Medicaid, which is highly regulated. And most states have managed Medicaid or adopted it during that time. We, as a country, really promoted Medicare Advantage, and then now we're in this situation where the water's boiling, and we're all the frogs going,
Yeah.
it's getting hot. But what do
Yeah.
we do? And John, I honestly don't have an answer. We tried it in 2010 with the Affordable Care Act. In my opinion, without getting political, things are worse, not better than they were then.
I can tell you what's not the answer, Brian. And because people are like, "Hey, we need single payer," that is not the answer. Okay, you want our guys payers are the problem. Let's turn the federal government into the only payer. Like that's not going to solve anything. That's going to make everything worse. If you think that this company is about making sure that they do what they want to do that benefits them, ask what the federal government is. Like, you haven't
Yeah.
seen ruthless yet until you see the federal government who thinks they can save 35 cents on you. They will. I mean, they'll walk a mile on hot coals to do it. So that's certainly not it at all. We have access issues. I mean, we obviously need the antitrust enforcement, Brian. But what I think we need more competition. I'm going to tell you a story real quick. Okay. So, large insurer, massive insurer. Okay. We see all of their commercials with all sorts of professional athletes, a victim of their own success, right? So they became lucrative at capturing some of the markets around California, Texas, Louisiana, Florida, that now they're a victim of their own success. They've gotten so huge and they've owned so much of those states' home policies. When those states get hit with national disaster, they can't afford to pay it. They're on a teeter, right? Like, as long as we can always make more in premiums than we give out, everything's fine. We have great profits. Unless we own 60% of all the eastern coast of Florida, because we went out and empowered our agents and we sent them to Hawaii, and we saw them on Facebook and Instagram being like, my company sent me to Hawaii for selling so many policies. Well, guess what? A hurricane hit now. And now that we own so much of it, we can't afford it.
Mm-hmm.
So guess what we're doing now? No more patients from there, or no more policyholders from there. They've shut down. This particular company's like, you cannot sell new. We were not taking new policy holders in Texas, Louisiana, Florida. We're just not. But the other thing they're doing is that they're now combing through your roof to find a way to not buy it. Hey, you didn't use this particular thing, or this type of, you used the wrong one. We don't use it. We just, the roofing company did it. Well, sorry, we can't pay. Why? Because we can't. We're a victim of our own size. So now we have to, like everybody who got too big, again, too big to fail. Now everybody below suffers, right? So we've got to have, how do we get more competition? We need more health insurance companies.
And we've done that historically. I was thinking about Stark loss, right, which are provider focused, right? And the concern was, physicians with their medical license, they write scripts for drugs, obviously, for pharmacy, for X-ray imaging. If they're a surgeon, they might take you to a surgery center that they own. Back in the day, physicians can own specialty hospitals or any hospital, and there was kind of concern of the consumer isn't educated enough to shop, or they take the doctor's word for it, or that there was more utilization. And some states have certificate of need for hospitals because sort of supply creates demand type of economics. But and Pete Stark, I think, before he passed away, expressed some regret for the law and some of the competition it stifled, right? So pulling that back could help more competition on the provider side. But some sort of, which we may regret eventually, but some sort of Stark for payers, right? You can't own or you can't employ doctors, right? Because you have contrary
Correct.
alignment. You can't own, not to beat them up, but you can't own a pharmacy or be owned by a pharmacy. You can't own Home Infusion. You can't own an AST. You can't own a home health company. You can't own primary care. Whatever it is that and I'm sure there's data there. If you dug down into it of what is misaligned in terms of the consumer's experience because of incentive, just like the tax code. There's incentives and disincentives to do certain behaviors. What what are the negative consequences of providers owning massive parts of the healthcare delivery system?
Yeah, I agree with you.
It's stark for
Go ahead,
payers.
Brandon.
Instead of
Well, I was
Medicare
going
for all, it's stark for payers.
right.
Yeah.
Well, and I'm just curious, Brian, is maybe one of the steps to remove the ability for forced lives to your pharmacies, right? I've seen so many times where, pharmacies, big or small, do all the heavy lifting up front, right? So if I got an IVIG patient and I'm doing something and they can get one or two fills from me, and then I have to pass them off to a, quote unquote, in-network pharmacy or whatever. Well, I've done all the, PA and benefits investigation, and now I have to hand it off. And, it's kind of like, I know there's some, any willing provider states and things like that, but, basically getting this in, and if I'm, let's say I'm a cystic fibrosis patient and I'm coming in and, chronic, young patient, pediatric, and then I'm being forced to go, somewhere else, and now chronic in this payer for, on their couch for as long as, my parents have a job and are being, done by the employer or whatever. I mean, that seems like unfair to the initial pharmacy for having to do all that extra effort, and then B, over advantageous to the payer. Then, again, competitor wise, they're just warehousing patients. They're not, I'd be really interested. One of my thoughts is, we hear about all these metrics and things that independents have to do to be in, a payer's network. Yet, they have, their own pharmacy. Are they actually handling their patients at that same level that they're requiring these ridiculous metrics to
No, they're not, because they don't
Yeah.
have to, because it's hypocritical. And the emperor's dancing around naked as a jaybird, and everybody's just pretending, right?
Yeah.
No, he's naked. Like, they are doing whatever they want to do because they can. And that's what they will do until someone stops them. That's 100%. And listen, I'll just be the one to say it. And I know I'm you're like the rev cycle guys. I'm like, yeah, the rev cycle guy's angry. Imagine that. All right. Yeah, we've heard this story before, right? Yeah.
But John, payers are our partners.
They are not our partners. They're not our partners. Our partners are our partners. Our payers are not. Our partners don't want to rob from us. I want to switch focus here. Little time left here. And I want to focus on data technology. Brandon Carpenter, MedEdge. That's your world, right? Data technology. Brandon, quickly here, talking through a couple of these things. How do you see AI and big data analytics and all of these things? Do you see this moving payers into a place where almost more advantageous for them?
Oh, absolutely. They're going to take that and, as a tool, right? Like it's a hammer. It can build and it can also destroy, right? And so when we think about AI, it's powers in the one wielding it, right? And so whatever they're going to do, they're going to be able to do it more efficiently, but they're going to do it in favor of them, right? And so I'm asking Pam the question of, is there medical professionals making these decisions for, step up treatment or staircase treatment, whatever, that's soon going to go to AI, right? And the question becomes, now you add that additional layer of, guess what? There's not any medical professional making it. Nobody actually trained. Nobody who even, cares that, it's, Brandon Carpenter who, is, 43 years old and has a family to take care of and needs to get this treatment as quickly as possible. No, it's all variables. It's going to boil. What AI, I feel, is going to do is going to boil the humanity out of healthcare.
Yeah, it's because, and one, Brandon, you look really good for 43. Very bold for putting that. But, I've become a very big Chat GPT user. I'm a power user, guys. So I just want to put that out. So I'm very tech friendly now, right? But what I've learned is that it's only as good as the prompts you put in. And I got to ask the question, Brian, what type of prompts is the payer putting into its AI in the future? Like, is it like, hey, really think about the patient first? Do you think those are the prompts that are being put into its AI philosophy?
That's a rhetorical question, right?
Correct. It's not. It's like, hey, find a way to make us not spend as much, please. And now we don't have to worry about these petty humans and their hearts and their emotions toward others. This is a stone cold machine.
Right.
So I feel like the dude from Terminator is just sitting here just typing, no, no, no.
Right.
Yeah, I mean, Brandon, I mean, we have to think about, all these tech-driven platforms, they keep saying, oh, it's going to empower patients, but it also depends on what monopoly exists, because you could restrict access. We could invent all of these ways in which patients have access to their data, access to their charts, access to all these things and their doctors. We still have this giant barrier.
Right. Right. Here's something else too, right? Like just, trying to play competitively on an even kill field, right? So we talked about the metrics that they require all these pharmacies to be at part of their level. Here's another thing to think about, John. A lot of times we see a lot of these PBMs where you have to send reports to them on a daily basis, weekly basis, whatever, about your dispenses, where they came from, who was the doctor prescribing it, all this things that you would think they would already have, to be honest with you, but they want you to share that. Now imagine this. Imagine that payer has a pharmacy location across the street from you, which is a real life. I have a client who's like, I can't believe I'm sending data to my quote unquote payer, and I'm looking at their pharmacy location across the highway from me.
Which is a direct competitor.
Which is a direct competitor, right? And of course they say, oh, there's, Chinese firewalls and all this kind of stuff,
Brandon,
but it's
they
like
would never, right? Pam,
they would never, yeah.
They would never look at my referral data and analyze that for their own, right? Surely not, Brandon. You jest, right? You wouldn't assume that a payer would.
A partner would absolutely not do that, John.
A partner would not do that. That's why they're not partners, Brandon. But anyway,
right.
Yeah. So I mean, that's a great point. I mean, Brian, Pam, I mean, like if I'm a pharmacy owner and you're like, hey, to get access, you have to give me my data. And you're like, you own my competitor.
And nothing is guarded more jealously than your data. Between, right. When you're an independent and you've got this information, the fox in the hen house is a real scary thing. There's non-solicitation agreements and
right.
People pay for data.
Yeah, they pay for data
forcibly
because that's important to them.
Yeah, that we call that a carjacking. That's what that is like, produce this the same way as I produced my wallet that a mugger produced a knife,
Yeah.
Yeah, really.
It's a little,
Pam, it's a little like old school, like, hey, Pam, that's a nice little pharmacy you have here. I'd hate for something to happen to it.
Yeah.
So why don't you go ahead and provide over that data that we want? Because, you built a nice little pharmacy here, and I see your kids are going to college. I'd hate for them to have to transfer to, New Mexico
junior college
state of boys and girls because, you don't have a business anymore. It feels like that. I'm sorry. It feels like that. It feels like a little bit of a Guido shakedown. It just does, it does. So this conversation has been fantastic. There's two things I want to do in our last couple minutes here. Hey, Google, show me a monopoly in healthcare. And the answer is payers, health insurance providers and payers.
Yeah.
And so, anything that stands out in this conversation, we'll start, Pam, final word here before we get to our crystal ball, anything that you say, hey, listen, this is, give you maybe 20 seconds. You got anything?
I work with independents. I work with startups, and I've never had a single client tell me my goal is to grow my business to the point where a payer will buy me. Their goal is to provide for their families and take good care of patients.
Right.
I need.
Yeah, I agree. Brandon Carpenter, final thoughts here before we get to crystal ball.
It's all about creating coalitions, I think, to bust this up. Independents have to really get together and tell a story, right? It's all about telling that story of these things, of the pediatric patient in the Northeast, or the hemophilia patient in the Midwest, or whatever, that they're just causing these things, and we've seen some of those stories, and let's be honest to you, there's also the fact that, some of these payers are publicly not painting themselves in a good light anyway. We've seen payer pharmacies just totally drop the ball on so many things, and things in the last few weeks that have come out in Wall Street Journal and stuff. So I think it's just a matter of time. But
Okay. Brent?
I think in terms of competition, what I'm seeing is private equity to me is neither good nor bad. It just is, right? And it's a sign of where private equity money flows in the provider system of who's getting their butt kicked, right? For a while it was gastroenterologists, then it was ophthalmologists, ortho, et cetera. And there's definitely money flowing into what we're talking about, AICs, home infusion therapy, specialty pharmacy. They need money to expand, but they also need they're squeezed so hard in terms of their margins, they don't have access to capital to operate. So private equity is, I think, a symptom of the battle.
Yeah, that's a good word there. All right, final thing, as always, in Beyond the Drip, we're going to do a closing thought. So today's is around crystal ball. I'm going to start with you, Brandon Carpenter. So crystal ball question is this. So I want you to look into your crystal ball and tell me how long until Congress or the DOJ begins to bring some type of reform or antitrust against payers. What's your call? How long? What year and how?
I think it's going to be 15, 20 years before something actually occurs. It's going to take a giant shift in the demographics of the country and the thought process. Because let's just be honest, right? Payers have deep pockets. And as you said, I forget the number you said on lobbying.
200 million.
200 million, let's just say on average of 535, politicians there, that's a good chunk of change, right?
Yeah,
and so from that perspective, it's going to take a real shift in, society for that to happen.
Yeah, that's depressing. Brian, give me better news. 15 to 20 years for Brandon. Come on, Brian. What you got?
I wasn't going to give you better news. I was just going to give you different news. I think November, if we have a Harris administration, we're more likely to head towards single payer. If we have a Trump administration, maybe some slight repeal of the Affordable Care Act. I don't see anything changing. Churchill said, you can always count on the Americans to do the right thing after they've tried everything else. So I think we'll get more screwed up before things get really bad, right? And then we'll do the right thing. So I see my vision is sort of parallel systems, right? For those who can afford to buy their way out of the current crap, keep paying their commercial premiums. But Medicare and Medicaid are still here to stay. The Affordable Care Act, more consolidation, less choice. I don't see growth in Cigna's getting out of commercial insurance like Humana did a while ago. There's one less choice coming in 2025.
Okay, Pam, I don't like either one of their answers.
I'm sorry, they're getting out of Medicare Advantage. Sorry.
It's getting more depressing, Pam. So now we're on you. Like, do you have any hope for us here?
I am always positive. I don't think it's so much a timeline as it is a course of events. I think consumers will stomp their feet as they see access being limited. And when I see vertical integration in this consolidated service line by payers, people are going to revolt. And the way that's going to happen is large corporations subscribing to a particular payer are going to have to pull back or demand more efficient.
All right, that's at least better than these two. All right, here's mine. Okay. So my hot take is this, wrapping up here. America is an ADHD society. It is, if it bleeds, it leads. It's going to take a terrible tragedy take over our news to finally, we didn't care anything about the Secret Service until the president got shot and we found out that it was really in a bad spot. Unfortunately, we don't fix planes until planes go down. It's going to take something that breaks through and we see some type of hero type little girl that dies when she never should have. And we have to look at that and we have to stare in the mirror and say, you know what? It's got to change. I wish it were different. That's my crystal ball. I think it happens in the next 10 years. I do. So this has been.
You didn't put any sunshine out there.
I know. You're in Arizona. You have all the sunshine, Brian.
Okay.
Everybody, this has been Beyond the Drip, a podcast about infusion and all things around infusion. So thank you so much for listening, and make sure you download all of our episodes everywhere you get podcasts. We'll continue to come. We'll have a special guest next month. We're very, very excited about that. As always, I want to thank my wonderful, wonderful co-host, Brandon Carpenter, MedEdge Solutions, Pam McIntyre, Expert Nursing Solutions, and then Brian O'Sullivan of the O'Sullivan Group. And so thank you so much. Have a wonderful day.